Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're going deep on shellcode.
Ooh.
Yeah, and when you first sent me this article from InfoSec Write-Ups
Right.
by this security researcher Kanaxasak, I have to admit I was a little intimidated just by the term shellcode. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi thriller.
Uh-huh.
But as I started reading it, I realized this is some pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
We're basically talking about a hidden set of instructions buried inside of malware
Right.
that actually dictate what the malware should do once it's infected a system.
Exactly.
So what was it about this article that piqued your interest? What makes shellcode so important to understand in the world of cyber attacks?
Well, I think the thing that's so fascinating about shellcode is its sheer versatility.
Mm-hmm.
It's this tiny but incredibly powerful set of instructions.
Right.
And those instructions are at the machine level.
Okay.
And they can be injected into a vulnerable application or system. And once that shellcode is executed, it's essentially like handing the keys to your house over to an intruder.
Ooh.
They could basically take control of applications, exploit software bugs,
Wow.
and even bypass security measures you might have in place.
It's like this hidden recipe for disaster.
It is, yeah.
But finding this shellcode within the malware's code,
Right?
I mean, I imagine that's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Absolutely.
How do security researchers even go about extracting it?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine trying to spot a very specific pattern
Okay.
in a massive jumble of letters and numbers.
Okay.
Shellcode often has these characteristic patterns that stand out
Got it.
to a trained eye.
Okay.
It's almost like recognizing a fingerprint.
Okay, so they've spotted the shellcode fingerprint, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
But how do attackers actually get this malicious code into a system in the first place?
Right.
The article mentions something called a buffer overflow.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right?
A buffer overflow is basically a technique where attackers exploit a weakness in a program
Okay.
by essentially stuffing it with more data than it can handle.
Okay.
Think of it like trying to pour 2 gallons of water into a 1-gallon jug.
Right.
The excess water,
Yeah.
in this case, represents the shellcode that's injected.
Interesting.
And this overflow can actually trick the system into executing that attacker's code, giving them a foothold.
That's pretty clever, albeit very sneaky.
Yeah.
How often do these buffer overflows happen?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
The buffer overflow vulnerability has actually been around for decades,
Oh, wow.
but it's still surprisingly effective.
Really?
And the reason for that is because developers, even experienced ones,
Right.
sometimes make mistakes in their code
Sure.
that leave these types of vulnerabilities open for exploitation.
So they're exploiting human error as much as they are exploiting technical weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of a sobering thought.
It is.
Okay, so let's say they've successfully injected their shellcode.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next? How do researchers go about figuring out what this code is actually designed to do?
Right.
It's like, becoming a code detective, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The article highlighted 2 main approaches that researchers use.
Okay.
The first one is debugging,
Mm-hmm.
where they actually use specialized tools.
Right.
Like by32dbdri was one mentioned in the article.
That.
To step through the shellcode's instructions one by one
Okay.
and try to understand its behavior.
Wow.
It's like meticulously dissecting a criminal's plan, step by step.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Now, the second approach
Okay, what's that?
involves running the shellcode in a very safe, controlled environment.
Okay.
And often they use something called a shellcode launcher.
Got it.
And this allows researchers to actually observe the code's actions
Okay.
without risking any real-world damage.
Got it.
You can think of it like detonating a bomb in a controlled explosion chamber.
Makes sense. Okay, so analyzing the shellcode sounds like it's absolutely crucial,
Absolutely.
not just for understanding a particular attack,
Right.
but also for figuring out how to defend against future ones, right?
Exactly.
It's like, studying a criminal's MO to try to predict their next move.
Precisely.
Yeah,
By understanding how shellcode works,
right.
researchers can develop countermeasures, they can strengthen security protocols,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately make systems more resilient to these types of attacks.
Now, the article mentioned a specific example of shellcode in action, something called a reverse shell.
Yes.
And this is where it got really interesting for me.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain what a reverse shell is
Listen.
and why it's such a dangerous tool for hackers?
So in this specific example,
Yeah,
the shellcode that was discovered by the researchers
right.
was designed to actually open a reverse shell
Okay,
on the victim's computer.
got it.
Imagine someone having this secret backdoor into your computer, able to access your files, your webcam, even your bank accounts potentially.
Jeez.
That's the power of a reverse shell.
Okay.
It essentially allows the attacker to remotely control
Wow.
the infected system.
That sends chills down my spine.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, once the attacker has this reverse shell access, they can basically do whatever they want on the victim's computer.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
They can steal data. They can install additional malware.
Oh,
They
what?
can even use that compromise system
Right.
to launch further attacks on other targets.
Jeez.
And what makes reverse shells particularly tricky
Yeah.
is that they can be incredibly difficult to detect.
Really?
They often mimic legitimate network traffic,
Oh, wow.
making them appear harmless to a lot of security systems.
So we've established that shellcode is this sneaky little code snippet
Right.
hidden within malware,
Mm.
acting like a set of instructions that dictate the malware's actions.
Exactly.
Attackers use clever techniques like buffer overflows
Ah.
to inject this shellcode into systems.
Yeah,
And once it's in, it can do some pretty serious damage, like
absolutely.
opening those terrifying reverse shells that we
Yeah.
just talked about.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting from this is that understanding shellcode isn't just some obscure technical detail.
Right.
It's about understanding the very core of how these cyber attacks work.
I completely agree.
But if shellcode is just one ingredient in this recipe for disaster,
Yeah,
what other elements might attackers be using
right.
to create these really potent cyber attacks?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And what else should we be aware of?
It's a great question. And, it's important to remember that shellcode
Right.
is often just one piece of a much larger puzzle
Okay.
when it comes to a cyber attack.
Got it.
You can think of it as one tool in a burglar's toolkit.
Okay.
They might use a crowbar to break in,
Right.
but they'll also need other tools
Sure.
to disable the alarm system, maybe
Okay.
pick the locks on the safe,
that.
and so on. Okay, so if shellcode is the crowbar, so to speak,
Right.
what are some of the other tools
Mhm.
that attackers might be using alongside it?
Well, there's a whole arsenal of techniques they employ.
Okay.
You think about phishing attacks,
Right.
where they trick users into revealing sensitive information
Yeah.
through like fake emails or websites.
Right.
That's like leaving a fake package on your doorstep to lure you out so they can slip in the back door.
Right. So they're playing on human psychology as much as they are exploiting technical vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And then there's malware,
Right. Malware.
which I know is kind of a broad term,
Yeah, it is.
but how does it fit into the picture?
Yeah. What is that in relation to shellcode?
So malware is essentially any type of malicious software
Okay.
that's designed to harm a computer system or steal data.
Okay.
And it can be spread through all sorts of different means,
Right.
like infected email attachments, malicious websites, even USB drives. You can kind of think of it as a Trojan horse sneaking malicious code onto your system,
Right.
disguised as something harmless.
Okay. And once that Trojan horse is inside, then the shellcode takes over.
Exactly.
Okay.
The shellcode acts as the instructions guiding that malware to achieve its objective.
And then you also have social engineering,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
which I know is a huge one.
It's all about manipulating people
Mm-hmm.
into giving up access to systems or information.
Right.
And it really preys on our trust
Sure.
and our willingness to help.
So instead of breaking down the door, they're convincing someone to open it from the inside.
Exactly.
That's almost scarier
It is.
because it really highlights how important the human element is
Right.
in all of this.
Absolutely. And then you can't forget about ransomware,
Oh, gosh. Yeah, a ransom.
the particularly nasty form of malware
Right.
that encrypts a victim's files and demands a ransom payment to restore access.
It's like holding your data hostage
It is. It is.
until you pay up.
It's a scary thought.
It is, wow, it sounds like there's a whole underworld of cybercrime out there
Right.
with attackers constantly developing new tactics and tools.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how can we possibly keep up?
Yeah, it's a constant arms race. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah,
As defenders develop new security measures,
right.
attackers are always finding ways to try to circumvent them.
Sure.
But thankfully, cybersecurity professionals
Uh-huh.
are constantly working to develop new tools and techniques to counter these threats.
It's reassuring to know that there are people out there actively fighting back against these attacks.
Absolutely.
But I have to ask, wouldn't all this focus on shellcode make attackers simply switch to other techniques? How do we know we're not just playing whack-a-mole here?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's true, attackers are always adapting their methods.
Right.
But I think by understanding the fundamentals of how these attacks work, including the role of shellcode,
Right.
we can develop much more comprehensive security strategies that can actually address a wider range of threats.
Okay.
It's really about building a more robust and layered defense system rather than relying on a single point of protection.
So it's about understanding the attacker's mindset,
Exactly.
their motivations, and the tools that they might use. It's not just about blocking a specific attack,
Right.
but about anticipating their next move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why analyzing shellcode
Right.
is so crucial.
Okay.
It gives us a glimpse into the attacker's thought process,
Okay.
their level of sophistication,
Yeah.
and their ultimate objective.
Speaking of analysis,
Yeah.
earlier you mentioned that even experienced security researchers
Right.
really need to carefully examine shellcode
They do.
to understand its true purpose. It's not always immediately obvious
Right.
just by looking at the code, is it? It's almost like deciphering a secret language.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Shellcode is often intentionally obfuscated, meaning that attackers will use a variety of techniques to make the code really difficult to understand,
Wow.
like using complex algorithms, confusing variable names,
Right.
or even breaking the code up into these small, seemingly unrelated chunks.
Okay.
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle,
Right.
where the pieces are all scattered,
Yeah.
and some might even be missing.
So it's this cat and mouse game
It is.
between the attackers who are trying to hide their intentions
Yep.
and the researchers who are trying to uncover them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as attackers get more sophisticated with their obfuscation techniques,
Right.
the researchers need to develop even more advanced tools and methods
Got it.
to analyze and decipher the code.
It's fascinating, but also a bit daunting
It is.
to think about this constant battle
Uh,
that's happening behind the scenes of our digital world.
all the time, yeah?
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We've
We've
have.
learned what shellcode is, how it's used in these cyber attacks, and the broader implications for individuals and organizations.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I'd love to get your thoughts on what the future holds for cybersecurity.
Yeah, sure.
What are some of the emerging trends or challenges that you see on the horizon?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing is the sheer volume and sophistication of these cyber attacks.
Okay.
They're happening more frequently,
Right.
and they're becoming increasingly complex
Right.
and difficult to defend against.
So it's not just about the number of attacks,
It's not, no.
but also about the complexity of the attacks.
Ex-
Like the attackers are constantly upping their game.
Absolutely, and this is further compounded
Yeah.
by the growing number of connected devices.
Sure.
You know, as more and more devices become part of the Internet of Things.
You're right, the IoT.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The potential attack surface expands exponentially.
So while the IoT offers all this incredible convenience and connectivity, it also creates this whole new world of vulnerabilities
It does, yeah.
for attackers to exploit.
It's like having more doors and windows
Right.
for a burglar to try on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the thing is,
Yeah.
many of these devices are designed with security as an afterthought,
Oh.
making them really easy targets for attackers.
That sounds like a pretty bleak picture.
It can be, yeah.
Are there any reasons to be optimistic about the future of cybersecurity?
I think despite all these challenges,
Yeah.
there are reasons to be optimistic.
Okay, good.
You know, we're seeing a lot of innovation happening in this field
Okay.
with new tools and technologies being developed all the time
Yeah.
to help us stay ahead of the attackers. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced threat detection systems,
Right.
all these things are playing a really crucial role
Got it.
in enhancing our cybersecurity posture.
So while the threats are evolving,
They are.
so are our defenses?
Yes, absolutely.
That is encouraging to know.
It is.
We're not just sitting ducks out there.
We're not.
Okay, good.
And I think it's important to remember
Yeah.
that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility.
Okay.
By working together,
Right.
individuals, organizations, and governments can create a more secure digital environment for everyone.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
You know, it's not just about relying on technology,
Right.
but also about fostering this culture of security awareness
Yes.
and collaboration.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that includes educating ourselves about the latest threats,
Right?
being vigilant about suspicious activity,
Yeah.
and taking those proactive steps to protect our data and our devices.
So it's a combination of Technological advancements,
Yes.
human awareness, and collective action.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But we've only just scratched the surface of this complex and constantly evolving field.
We have.
What I'm taking away from this conversation is that knowledge is power.
It is.
The more we understand about these threats,
Yes.
the better equipped we are to defend ourselves against them.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And, that's what makes these deep dives so valuable.
Yeah, they really are.
They provide us with the insights and knowledge that we need
Right.
to navigate this increasingly complex digital landscape.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our exploration of shellcode.
Okay.
We've learned that this seemingly small piece of code
Right.
can have this massive impact,
It can.
acting as the hidden instructions behind many cyber attacks.
Yeah.
We've explored how attackers use it, how researchers analyze it,
Right.
and the broader implications for cybersecurity
Absolutely.
in our interconnected world.
Yeah.
But as with any deep dive, we've only just scratched the surface.
That's true.
There's a whole universe of knowledge out there
There is.
for those who are curious enough to explore it.
Absolutely.
And I encourage our listeners to do just that.
I agree.
Keep asking questions.
Yes.
Keep learning.
Keep learning.
Keep learning.
Stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
Sounds good.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We often talk about cybersecurity
Yeah.
in terms of, firewalls and antivirus software.
Uh-huh.
But this whole conversation has really highlighted that human element.
It has.
Both in terms of the attackers
Right.
who create these threats
Mhm.
and the researchers who are working so hard to combat them.
Absolutely. And it's easy to get caught up in the technical details.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it really is people
Right.
who are behind these attacks.
Mhm.
And it's people who are developing the solutions.
Yeah.
And, that's what makes this field so endlessly fascinating to me.
Mhm.
It's this constant battle of wits,
Yeah.
like a game of chess where both sides are constantly adapting and evolving their strategies.
Speaking of the researchers,
Mm.
I'm really curious to learn more about the specific tools and techniques
Okay.
that they use to analyze and decipher this shellcode.
Mhm.
We touched on debugging and those shellcode launchers, but what other tricks do they have up their sleeves?
Well, imagine like a detective's toolkit
Okay.
filled with all these specialized gadgets
Uh-huh.
designed to uncover hidden clues.
Yeah, got it.
That's essentially what cybersecurity researchers have at their disposal.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Give me some examples.
Sure.
What kind of gadgets are we talking about?
So one essential tool
Mm-hmm.
is a disassembler.
Okay, a disassembler.
And think of it like taking apart
A
a complex machine
Got it.
to see how each cog and wheel works.
Right.
So a disassembler essentially breaks down the shellcode
Okay,
into its individual instructions,
got it.
making it much easier to understand its functionality.
So it's like translating this foreign language
Yeah.
into something we can understand.
Exactly.
And once they have the instructions laid out,
Right.
how do they actually go about making sense of it all?
Right. Well, that's where decompilers come in.
Decompilers, okay.
Yeah. These really clever tools attempt to translate that low-level assembly code,
Right.
which is what shellcode is often written in,
Right.
into a more human-readable format.
Wow.
It's like having a Rosetta Stone for malicious code.
That makes sense. But even with these tools, analyzing shellcode still sounds incredibly complex.
It can be.
I mean, are there any ways to make that process safer
Sure.
or more controlled?
Absolute. So that's where sandboxing comes in.
Sandboxing, okay.
Imagine a virtual playground
Okay.
for dangerous code,
Okay.
where researchers can actually let it run wild
Right.
without any real-world consequences.
Got it.
So sandboxing tools create these isolated environments
Okay.
where researchers can safely execute and observe the behavior of that shellcode
Okay.
without it, causing any damage to their actual systems.
That sounds incredibly useful.
It is, yeah.
It's like having a safety net
Yeah,
for dealing with this potentially dangerous code.
absolutely.
And then, are there even more advanced tools
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
beyond that?
Yeah, you have things like static and dynamic analysis techniques
Okay.
that can really delve even deeper
Wow.
into the code's structure and behavior,
Okay.
revealing hidden patterns and potential vulnerabilities.
Interesting.
Think of it like a detective
Uh-huh.
using forensic science
Yeah.
to analyze fingerprints or DNA evidence.
Wow, it's like a whole detective's toolkit
It is.
for cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But even with all these tools and techniques at their disposal,
Right.
would you say the researchers have the upper hand in this battle against shellcode?
Not necessarily. Remember, it's a constant arms race.
Right.
As researchers develop new tools and techniques,
Right.
attackers adapt their methods,
Of course.
finding new ways to obfuscate their code and evade detection.
Yeah.
It's this ongoing game of cat and mouse.
So even with all of this advanced technology,
Yeah,
the human element remains crucial.
it does.
It's about the creativity and ingenuity
Yes.
of the researchers who are developing these tools and the attackers who are constantly trying to outsmart them.
Exactly. And that's what makes this field
Yeah,
so dynamic and exciting.
it does.
It's this constant challenge,
Right?
pushing the boundaries of knowledge and innovation.
Well said. And on that note,
Okay.
I think we've reached the end of our deep dive
Yeah.
into the world of shellcode.
Yeah.
We've learned that this seemingly small piece of code
Right?
can have this massive impact,
Mm-hmm.
acting as the hidden instructions behind many cyber attacks.
Absolutely.
We've explored how attackers use it,
Mhm.
how researchers analyze it, and the broader implications for cybersecurity in this increasingly interconnected world.
Yes.
But as with any deep dive, we've only just scratched the surface.
That's true.
There's so much more to learn.
There is.
There's a whole universe of knowledge out there for those who are curious enough to explore it.
Absolutely.
And I encourage our listeners to do just that.
I agree.
Keep asking questions, keep learning,
Keep learning.
and stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Until next time, stay curious
Yes.
and stay safe out there.